good evening, everybody, and welcome today to our program on by Hassan Abdullah. Is violence responsible for global warming? And so we are live on Facebook. I welcome all of you, and I would first like to introduce the panelists to everybody. We have Hassan Abdullah, who is going to be the main speaker for today, and Hassan Abdullah has already done a program for us on Ghalib. We have today, Hassan Bhai, we have today Mr. Dr. Eraj Bharucha, who has written a lot on environment, wild animals, nature, and he is a surgeon by profession, and he is a very eminent person in the field of environment, And then we have Sandhi, who is joining us from Portland. And though, please don't mind him, he's my classmate, and he's a very, very knowledgeable person. And he's a very senior person from Intel, and he does a lot of work for environment, astronomy, anything which is good for mankind. And I have also Dr. Robert D'Souza, who is coming from USA just now, and he's going to be doing a program for us on 22nd on 3 of the important natural forests that he visited recently in India. And then we have Mr. Sanjay Saxena, who is a very common or very loyalist of Gyanpedia, and he joins us from Gurgaon, an ex-RBI person. And we have Freddie. Freddie is also an eminent photographer, and he has been photographing from Gyanadab since God knows from the time Gyanadab started, and recently on Gyanpedia. I think Hassan Bhai, you are not member of the Gyanpedia WhatsApp group, but Freddie has been contributing a lot of photographs to the Gyanpedia. And I would like to introduce my very close friend Apurva Bahadur, who has been with us for all of the Gyanadab programs, and he's a rail fan. He's an engineer by profession, and he has done a lot of work in promoting Indian railways. And so welcome everybody. Hassan Bhai, would you like to put in some words from your side, sir?
Thanks to Farooq Bhai, and thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to all those who are here to listen to us. And I request Farooq Bhai to start.
Yeah. So Hassan Bhai requested me to pre-record his seminar because he has a problem with the throat, and then he has to pause every 10 minutes. So Hassan Bhai, don't mind if I mention this to the audience, because they may wonder why they cannot talk to Hassan Bhai during the program. So I'll be starting the recording just now. And then it will be a 40 minutes recording webinar. And then I would like to open the questions to everybody, because this is a very sensitive subject, global warming, and everybody can have their own opinion about it. And Hassan Bhai has gone forward to research it a lot during the lockdown. And he has written down a manuscript, which is going to convert into a book shortly. So I requested Hassan Bhai, why don't you make a program? And he has coined this sentence: is violence responsible for global warming? So without much, and we will start the program, right?
Thanks, Farooq Bhai, for your kind words and giving me this opportunity to share my views on climate change. Thanks to all those who have spared time to be with us during this discussion on the issue or on the question, is climate change rooted in violence? I'm a partisan of Ghalib, and Ghalib says, Tedha laga hai qat kalame sar navisht ko. The pen that wrote my fate had a tilted nib. Our discussion is divided into 4 sections. First, we discuss the issue, then the ethos, and then come to the aids, and last, the praxis. The issue is that there is no planet B, and time is short to secure a livable and sustainable future, tell climate scientists. And Greta Thunberg says, act as you would in a crisis, because it is a crisis. Let us refresh the 3 important concepts with regard to climate change: nature, entropy, and ecosystem. Now, nature encompasses everything. It is continually evolving. It has finite resources. consumption of natural resources or intervention in nature increases entropy, affects ecosystem. Entropy was originally described as the waste heat or energy loss. It's like aging that leads to death, whether of humankind or of planet Earth. Every organism, just by living and breathing, increases entropy of the universe. But, and this but is invariably very critical or crucial, the quantum of increase and the pace of disorder are largely in our hands. Because our consumption of resources and intensive and extensive interventions in nature increase entropy excessively and rapidly. Ecosystem comprises plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape. All of these work together to form the bubble of life. Ecosystem is in natural balance, and if that balance is excessively disturbed, we get reprimand from nature, a rebuke from nature. Therefore, in view of the foregoing, optimal consumption, optimal entropy increase, and balanced natural ecosystem need to be our watchword for health and longevity of humankind. Factors affecting climate. In some cases, the climate response to land use and land cover change may even exceed the contribution from increasing greenhouse gases. But US National Research Council recommended inclusion of land use and land cover change in 2005, a highly delayed acceptance of reality. And today, major portions of the Amazon rainforest have shifted from a carbon sink to a carbon source. And this shift has severe planet-wide negative implications. Now we talk about the metabolic rift. We spend resources on raw food that we require for our nourishment and cotton, that is for our attire, clothes. That is, we spend resources on agriculture. And we also spend resources to dispose of urine and excreta considered waste. But this waste contains useful ingredients for soil, that is nourishment to our raw food and cotton. So there is double whammy. In this village-town dichotomy is a fundamental source of the disturbance of the ecosystem and excessive increase in entropy, both. England's second agricultural revolution, 1815 to 1880, they had to resort to explicit policies for the importation of bone and guano, again, a manifestation of village-city rift. At the root of every manifestation of climate change lies the excessive disturbance of the natural ecosystem and or the excessive increase in entropy. Either one or both of them are there at the root of manifestation of any climate change. Now, the research concludes we are destroying Earth, and that's why we are facing existential crisis. And multiple disasters are likely in the next 2 decades. Even if we are able to restrict temperature rise within 1.5 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial times. And what do the governments do or say? They say, could you kindly rephrase that in equivocal, inaccurate, vague, self-serving, and roundabout terms that we can all understand? That is what the government said to the stark reality staring us in our face that we are destroying Earth. Now, the problem is cut out. Attention towards climate change has been there for over 50 years. Conferences of parties has been held yearly for 26 years, where the powers that be meet. 1,700 scientists, including Nobel laureates, issued warning in 1992 about this climate change. And from time to time, the warnings have been renewed. But what is the result? Worsening scenario. Why? Because the scientists' suggestions have never been implemented by the powers that be. So the inference is we need to probe the reigning philosophy, institutions, and praxis. This trio, we have to probe deeply to find out why the climate change has been worsening. Now, this trio, resource consumption, entropy increase, and ecosystem disturbance. These are all inevitable, granted, no questions. But again, that but comes, differentiate between unavoidable and avoidable. What is unavoidable? Like breathing is unavoidable, or so many other things. Fine. But what is avoidable must be avoided. Why? So that we live a healthy life and a longer life as a humankind. Now, Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. That means what is of greatest importance is to find the root, the genesis, or the origin, or the evolution of the problem. And if we are able to do that successfully, after spending 55 probably minutes, then the solution virtually reveals itself. The solution is evident. We don't have to do much thinking to find the solution. Einstein also said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That means the solution to the problem lies outside the domain of the problem. So these two things we have to keep in mind when we brood over the problem. My understanding is, when I studied the issue of climate change, that the philosophy of othering through aids to the status quo results in the praxis of violence. To illustrate my submission, I have chosen US and India as the two examples, and the time period that is generally our focus here is after the Second World War. Now, violence is that creates avoidable consumption, entropy increase, and ecosystem disturbance. That is my submission, and we will see why I say that. And that is why violence is to be avoided. And violence emanates from the philosophy of othering, and the mediator is aids to status quo. So all this is to be avoided or replaced. So we see what we mean by the ethos. A sense of the philosophy of othering. As Rousseau, the French philosopher, spoke with outrage about the person who had first fenced off a plot of land and said, "This is mine." Rousseau says, beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody. So that is philosophy of othering. Its first part is production of knowledge. It starts right from the conceptual bias in the terms that are coined and used, be it atheist, secular, liberalization, terror, and so on. Okay, just see terror. Now, we all know what terror is commonly referred as, the sporadic acts of bomb blast. But please tell me why the currently going on war between Russia and Ukraine is not an act of terror. It's a much bigger act of terror. And secondly, terror is the affect, the subjective feeling, not the act. Act is violence. All these acts are violence, whether it is gender violence, caste violence, communal violence, war, or this bomb violence, what is known as terror. So it is in the interest of the powers that be that they use terminology in such a way. We'll see later why they use this terror. Okay, US first used has always, racism has always been there in US. And after the Second World War, they coined and they went in for this Cold War philosophy, where the Soviet Union, which was the ally during the Second World War, became the enemy as soon as the World War was over. Because the philosophy of othering requires an enemy to go in for violence. So you always require an enemy. And US being a world power, which is commonly in the common parlance is called an imperialist power, needs an enemy using the ploy of which it can indulge in violence anywhere and everywhere. And post-Cold War stratagems, when Soviet Union disintegrated, he was no longer there. So the philosophy could not stand. So they first Fukuyama came with the end of history philosophy that now the all over the world the so-called liberal democracy will reign supreme. But what happened during that brief period, the military-industrial complex started declining because of the peace. And there is no way that the US can afford the decline of its military-industrial complex, because that is the growth engine for it. So Huntington, Samuel Huntington, who was earlier, who had worked with Clinton, and not only Clinton, he had worked with the racist Botha regime. He came up with the philosophy of clash of civilizations and equated what you call the religion with the civilization. The religion Islam became civilization, and forget that all the tin pot dictators of the Middle East are best allies of US. It became clash of civilization, US versus, but there was no geographical entity like Soviet Union. So the terrorism came into vogue. And with 9/11 attack, it got well engraved in the minds of one and all over the world. So that is how the philosophy of othering works. A few weeks after 9/11, Wesley Clark, NATO Supreme Allied Commander of Europe from 1997 to 2000, was told about a memo from US Defense Secretary Office that revealed plans to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and moving on to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran to control oil and gas resources. Now, the two-pronged strategy of the US was, one, creation of the specter of Islamic terrorism. Thus, the secret acts of bomb blasts came in vogue, and the people were made to internalize the bogey of terrorism through elaborate propaganda and practices. And the second prong was to wage wars against and occupy the strategically important and militarily weak Muslim nations for strengthening its hegemony and directly usurp their resources, and all in the name of democracy and peace. This is the scene of 9/11, 2001, Pentagon, and shortly after, US bombed Afghanistan. Philosophy of othering, production of knowledge. In case of India, we have had reactionary historiography, or what is commonly called communal historiography, where no attention is paid to economic relations or the institutions of governance, and all attention is paid to the religion of the ruler. Modern writings of the pre-modern India, whether be they Orientalists or nationalists or utilitarian, all are subsumed under this communal. And ultimately, this led to the two-nation theory and the division of our country. This is writer set ablaze a shop during riots in Northeast Delhi, which went on for 3 days in February 2020, right in the capital. The second part of philosophy of othering is spreading knowledge. So Carl Sagan, the famous astrophysicist who wrote several books, including the classic Cosmos, he says about killing curiosity in his book, if you go and meet kindergartners or first grade kids, you find a class full of science enthusiasts. What is a dream? Why do we have toes? Why is the moon round? What is the birthday of the world? Why is the grass green? And so on. But when the same kids reach to 12th grade and you go and talk to them, there is none of that. They have become incurious. Why? Something terrible has happened between kindergarten and 12th grade. Yes, that something terrible is deliberate. The system doesn't want the natural curiosity, the thinking human being has to be converted into a capital augmenting robot. And that is why the blinkers are put on right at the school stage. And our education system also results in the absence of scientific attitude, which is in fact even all the more required today because of the advancement of knowledge and info explosion. One needs to sift fact from fiction and understand the reality. In India, we have additional disadvantage that education is inaccessible to lot many of our fellow citizens because of the resources, lack of resources. And then on top of that, we also follow irrational language policy where mother tongue or regional language is not used for as a medium of instruction at the primary level. So what do we include amongst the aids? Okay, before going to the aids of the present system, we see what the present system is like. Its motive is profit for capital, and military industrial complex of US calls the shots, that is the engine of US economy. Needless increase in entropy is inherent in GDP-centric system. Arms industry is a classic example. Arms serve no useful purpose. We can't eat arms, we can't wear arms, and they contribute hugely to GDP. There are so many other instances. We need not go into those details. In 1990s, after USSR dissolution, liberalization, so-called liberalization, that is unbridled freedom to loot, is strengthened. So this is the existing iniquitous system. Now, aids to the status quo are institutions, corruption, deep state, and media. We are first discussing about US and NATO. Institutions that at the world level, international institutions that US that help US in controlling the world include International Monetary Fund and World Bank, the money lenders, World Trade Organization, and World Intellectual Property Organization that put conditionalities such that even a substance like vaccine is not allowed to be developed by others. It is trade secret. And NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, well, the less said about it, the better. Arms imports are a major contributor to debt in the developing world. This is what Britannica Encyclopedia says. Institutionalized corruption is evident from the fact that during last 15 years, 6 major scandals involving virtually the whole world broke out. And Pandora Papers 2021 may be fresh in our memory, being the latest. About the deep state, I don't want to list out the incidents where CIA has been involved. I quote a CIA undercover for almost 10 years. She says about the lesson she learned, unreal stories are manufactured by a really small number of people on both sides, I will say all sides, who amass a great deal of power and wealth by convincing the rest of us to keep killing each other. What are these both sides? The powers that be on the two warring nations. I say all nations, all the powers that be are hand in gloves, and we, the common people, kill each other. Media is obviously also controlled by the powers that be. Still, if there is one Edward Snowden, who was an American intelligence consultant, and he raised ethical issues and then had to quit his job, ultimately he had to run away and seek asylum. Or Chelsea Manning, US Army intelligence analyst, she leaked 750,000 sensitive military and diplomatic documents. And for that, she had to undergo 7 years in prison. Julian Paul Assange, Australian journalist, published Manning's documents in 2010, Afghanistan War, Iraq War, and Cablegate. That is diplomatic missions, what they sent to State Department for the period 1966 to 2010. Institutional lying and duplicity that Julian Assange brought into the open is the greatest public service. But he has been in prison since April 2019, resisting extradition to US. Before being imprisoned, he was given asylum by Ecuador. Anyway, that is the history. In case of India, aids to status quo are the same, but here we will discuss about the internal institutions, that is legislature and the economy of loot, bureaucracy and judiciary. Even official wealth of legislators increases substantially. Professor Arun Kumar says India's black economy, he has written a book on this, and India's black economy is estimated to be 62% of GDP. 62%. Then there is another very neat method of siphoning resources from the common people to shift to the chosen few, gross non-performing assets, the loans not returned. India is among the most unequal countries in the world with rising poverty and an affluent elite. Bureaucracy, we all know, reports to the legislature and is tool of the legislature. Judiciary, well, the less I will not discuss. I'm not a lawyer, but we can see that issues like Article 370 and Pegasus are kept on the back burner. Then we have deep state is there. Every country has. The countries themselves make the rules, but they also make a rule where there's an exception to the rule, and that is called deep state. Two police officers provide interesting case studies of this deep state. They are Hemant Karkare, who died in that Bombay terror attack, and Davinder Singh, who was caught ferrying terrorists. Well, the Latin phrase, cui bono, who benefits, is the best check to see what these people were doing and whose interest this deep state serves. Jaswant Singh wanted parliamentary oversight and auditing of secret service funds, which is thousands of crores. Vajpayee shot down the proposal. None has done it. Media. Reporters Without Borders undertook a research study of India, and they found that a small number of companies and conglomerates dominate this country's media. In 2016, India ranked 133, not good, but it has slipped to 150 in 2022. That is the World Press Freedom Index. We may recall that Lankesh, Gauri Lankesh, Kalburgi, Pansare, and Dabolkar, all rationalists come journalists, were murdered. Our media doesn't have time or space, much space or time to discuss issues like PM CARES Fund, electoral bonds, Rafale, EVM, GNPAs, less wealth tax, more hunger. These are not the issues that interest media. Anyway, I will not say much. So, praxis of violence. Global expenditure in 2021 on military grew for a seventh year in succession and stands at $2,113 billion. $2,113 billion. And the five largest spenders were US, China, India, the UK, and Russia. These five countries accounted for 62% of the expenditure. On 13,000 nuclear weapons, estimated to be around 13,000, the global expenditure in 2021 on their upgrading and maintaining was, with a 9% hike from the previous year, $82.4 billion. And all the 9 nations, the nuclear power nation, nuclear arms nations were involved. US and India, of course, are there. Now, covert violence is the other side of the coin. It inevitably accompanies overt violence. Already each year, 5.3 million under 5-year-old infants and 7.4 million people in total perish from deprivation. Now, with this ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine is supposed to be the granary for the world. What will happen is anybody's guess. Execution in Saigon, February 1, 1968. The little girl of Vietnam Napalm bomb, June 8, 1972. The Afghan girl in a refugee camp, Pakistan, June 1984. Globalization of agony, Volcano, Colombia, 1985. This girl was stuck for 3 days, was not rescued, and died. Death Road, starvation death, 1993, in a Sudan village. Sudan is a country which is richest in agriculture in Africa. And the photographer who took this photograph committed suicide the next year. Largest open-air prison since 1948. The child resisting the tank, Palestine, 1990s. 20-meter high tsunami, Sumatra Island, Indonesia, 2004. The unknown and unnamed and unsung photographer who took this photograph obviously perished in that tsunami. Farmer being evicted, the struggle of farmers, Brazilian Amazon, 2009. Horses panic as a wildfire approaches near Canberra, Australia, 2020. These are only some photographs that highlight the plight. The praxis of violence, its characteristic is huge defense expenditure coexisting with poverty. Even in the same country, forget about the whole world. War, the expression of external othering, military-industrial complex, as we have already talked about, is the reason, being the growth engine is the reason for this war. And these wars are waged to usurp resources, perpetuate dominance, diversion of the people from real issues, and deprive the masses. Profit for capital is the raison d'etre of capitalism. Productive forces are pretty high today, but still people are deprived, because otherwise, if they become aware, that will be dangerous for the system, for capitalism. And therefore, wastage of resources is inherent to the system. And violence results in concentration of resources and rising of disparities, along with the obvious wastage of resources. Violence against all species, including human beings. And that is the consequence of philosophy of othering. And it results in disturbance of ecosystem and excessive increase in entropy. Internal othering leads to internal violence and moves the society towards an authoritarian state. Why is nuclearism a sign of madness? Nuclear weapons should not be used because not only they kill a large number of people, transgenerational disorders are caused, and it's unimaginable havoc. But the nuclear powers not only made nuclear bombs, they have made so many nuclear bombs, as we have seen, that they can destroy the world several times over. Nuclear weapons should not be developed, because once they are not to be used, why develop them? Why waste resources that are finite? Why not leave those resources for posterity? Nuclear weapons became acceptable to the people because of the propaganda and because of the nuclear power that was touted as safe, economical, and clean, and is none of these. Today, even the nuclear industry people admit that it is not economical. And how can it be clean when the most polluting substance, the radioactive element, is involved? And safe? I think we should not forget the accidents of Chernobyl and Fukushima. And despite the fact that we have been producing nuclear power for decades, even today we don't have a solution for permanent disposal of the waste. So a no to nuclear power is the answer. Now, these are some illustrious people who opposed nuclear weapons, nuclear power. J. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the nuclear bomb. He not only opposed, he also said the steps which we took with regard to atomic energy could be understood in terms of the terror of atomic warfare. Terror of atomic warfare. Bertrand Goldschmidt, who was scientific advisor and French delegation at UNAEC in 1940s, in his article much later that he wrote, he criticized US for her nuclear policies right from the Second World War. And he says it is not the elimination of the nuclear weapons that will bring world peace, but world peace that will render possible their elimination. These nuclear powers are not going to let their privilege and power be taken away. Richard Overy, professor of history at the University of Exeter and editor of the Oxford Illustrated History of World War II, OUP 2015, says there was no need to drop atomic bomb to subdue Japan. A. Gopalakrishnan, chairman, Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, Government of India, and chairman of the 16-nation drafting committee for the Convention on Nuclear Safety, says excessive secrecy plus lack of accountability leads to a big question mark on safety. Chernobyl, proof number 3 reactor. Even the robots could not cope. And then they had employed human beings. And the radiation was so high that they could not stay any longer than 40 seconds before the radiation they received reached the maximum authorized dose a human being should receive in his entire life. But how long they would have actually stayed there and how many people would have lost because of that cleaning operation is anybody's guess. Nuclear madness, wars, internal violence. In case of US, first it dropped bomb on Japan that we just saw was needless. Then it went on intensifying its nuclear weaponization program. Why on earth? US was the only power having nuclear energy, nuclear bomb at that point of time. Why? It went on from nuclear fission bomb to nuclear fusion bomb, a much more lethal weapon. Only they know better why they went for it. Nuclearism is resources and labor wastage. It creates hostile environment, secrecy and coercion, and hegemony. In case of internal violence, we are all familiar with racism in US and the gun culture. With regard to wars, it initiated Cold War, it formed NATO. Starting 1961, US has fought 5 major wars: Cold War, Vietnam, Afghanistan and Iraq wars, and war on terror. Except first, lost all. says William J. Astor, professor of history, Lieutenant Colonel of US Armed Forces. But why it fought? Because military industrial complex earned enormous profits. Whether you win or lose is not the main issue. That is the issue. Through excessive use of weaponry and using incessant lying, as revealed by the Pentagon Papers for Vietnam, the missing WMDs for Iraq, and Afghan war papers, these were used to justify wars. US President Eisenhower said during his farewell address to the nation in January 1961, a permanent large arms industry, an immense military establishment, directly engaging 3.5 million people, 3.5 million people, and the annual expenditure being more than the net income of all United States corporations. It has all pervasive influence in economic and political arena, and it is dangerous. Now, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, Somalia, the Philippines, Libya, and Syria, the expenditure after 9/11 has been $8 trillion and counting. Not only that, at least 929,000 people, including over 387,000 civilians, killed by direct war violence. And several times more civilians became indirect casualties, say because of sewage and other infrastructural issues, water loss, and water-related diseases. Many have died later on from injuries and illnesses sustained in the war zones. And many more are living with disabilities and war-related illnesses. Not only that, at least 38 million people were forcibly displaced in and from these countries. This is from a research project being undertaken by Brown University of US. Smoke rises from an oil refinery after an attack. In case of India, the nuclear madness got an impetus after the NDA government came to power in March 1998. On May 13, 1998, it went in for Pokhran 2 testing, where 5 bombs were tested. And May 28, 1998, Pak retaliated. The powers that be of both the countries forget that the two countries are a geographical continuum, and if nuclear bomb is used, it will destroy both. Wars, about 1962 Indochina War, Lieutenant General Khanna, writing in Indian Defense Review, says that it was avoidable and India was wrong. About internal violence in our country, we all know, we are all very familiar. Still, for the sake of completeness, we may recall our bloodied independence and the variants of violence, be that gender or be that caste or communal or whatever, industrial. About terrorism also, we are very familiar. The essential act of war is destruction, not necessarily of human lives, but of the products of human labor. War is a way of shattering to pieces or pouring into a stratosphere or sinking in depths of sea materials which might otherwise be used to make the masses too comfortable, and hence, in the long run, too intelligent, even when weapons of war are not actually destroyed. Their manufacture is still a convenient way of expending labor power without producing anything that can be consumed by the workers. Thus wrote George Orwell in 1984. Results of war. America's 60-year war is a success for military-industrial complex, but failure for workers or democracy. Only wars and war machinery are the ultimate consumer of capitalism's production and the surest means to keep the people at large poor and uneducated, but still busy. This was goodbye to war, the Second World War, when people thought that the war was over for good. August 14, 1945, Times Square, two strangers kissing passionately after hearing about the end of World War. That is what the peace results in. Love. Thanks and a request. Thanks to the contributors to knowledge from whom I have borrowed. Thanks to Farooq Bhai and other propagators, supporters of knowledge sharing. Thanks to all for sparing time. Request for critical appraisal. Conclude with Ghalib's line. Salai aam hai yarane nuqtada ke liye. It is an open invite to friends with insight. Thank you very much. And I am here for further discussion. Thanks.
Sir, Apurva Bahadur, I'm actually stunned at, these are the obvious things which everybody knows, but you've put it down in a very well-researched paper. And there isn't a practical solution out of this. That is our thing. I know that this is the truth. This is the way it goes. But I was hoping that you will give some sort of a practical solution where we can be more productive, more fruitful, less violent, and stuff like that. We are such part of the cogs that unless we do our daily work, we will not survive. So we don't have the time to take on a big system, and certainly not the military complex. So what are your thoughts on this? Yeah.
Do I respond?
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, if you may recall, I quoted Einstein saying that I spent 55 proverbial minutes on the issue, on the question, on the genesis or the evolution of the problem. And that 55 minutes, proverbial 55 minutes, I have presented. Now, when the issue is so deep-rooted, like I start from the concepts itself, how the concepts are created, how they impact our understanding, how our education system functions. So it is well entrenched in the society. Now, something that all pervasive and that well entrenched there can't be any quick fix solutions. First and foremost, we must appreciate that we have to go to the roots. First, our understanding has to be clear and comprehensive. Incidentally, it's a 300-page thesis with 500 references, out of which only the last 20-25 pages I have left, where I discuss the so-called outline of a solution. That requires an entire discussion on its own. And again, that solution, me and you sitting in the drawing room cannot prescribe. That solution will emerge from the struggle. But whatever those struggles are, their understanding has to be clear. Only when there is a common ground of understanding of the roots of the problem, the dimensions of the problem, then from there, in several directions, several movements take place. Just to cite one very small example, I don't know how, it's not very old, just during pandemic, an organization called, what is that? World, sorry, I'm forgetting. I'll just recall and let you know. There's an international organization, Progressive International. Sorry, Progressive International is the name, and that presidential candidate who lost, the Democratic candidate. Again, I forget the name. Anyway, Bernie Sanders. He is one of the people who are there. Then Arundhati Roy, and so many others are there. It's an international forum, a progressive forum. They work anywhere and everywhere and try to coordinate the efforts of all the progressive forces all over the world. Now, it's only one effort. Then there are so many other initiatives all over the world at a very small level to a global level. All of them, first of all, we all who are interested in changing the status quo have to have a common understanding of the ground reality. From there, we can all have our different movements, ultimately coalescing in one direction, taking towards emancipation from the current stranglehold of the powers that be. See, when the powers that be of the entire world are united, you can imagine what we are up against.
I just would like
struck me
to.
was the topic. The topic is how climate change relates to violence. So I was just wondering how you would reconcile what's going on in China. China is one of the most polluting countries in the world, along with the US and India. And they've not really had that involved in violence, apart from, of course, with some minority groups, some Muslim groups in China. So how would you reconcile this topic with what's happening in China as far as pollution is concerned? And
one second. Let me make it very clear. The reactionary forces of every hue, everywhere, help each other grow. And China is no exception. Now, COVID-19 pandemic is a very recent case, we all remember. And incidentally, that is where from I started working on this. Now, China is the one which is most polluting, among the most polluting. I am not discussing, I'm not saying that US and India are the most polluting. I just took two countries as the example. China is an upcoming power. It is next to US in terms of arms expenditure. About pollution, I don't know exactly where it stands, but it is among the leading polluters. And India and China, they were the only two countries, those who opposed during that COP26 about signing of coal. So I am by no means I am saying that China is not a polluter. It is. Every country of the world is that's what I said, not the warring two nations. All the governments, or virtually all, exceptions apart, if any, are hand in glove in this. Otherwise, for 26 years, you are holding conference of parties. But
no, my thought was about the link to violence. The pollution, the link to violence. That is
what is violence? That's why, if we may recall, the very first, I tried to make it clear, the entropy, the nature, and the, what was the third?
Ecosystem.
Ecosystem, yeah. So we start from there. Now, violence in that slide, if we may recall, I said violence, we have to differentiate between avoidable and unavoidable. Now, violence is what creates avoidable consumption of resources, avoidable increase in entropy, and avoidable disturbance of the ecosystem. That is how I link violence. And to me, violence is not only war. That's why I use covert violence and overt violence both. And both are the two sides of the same coin, I say. Hunger and expenditure on war. That's why I quote that lengthy quote on war. What war does, it wastes resources. Even if wars are not fought, expenditure on armaments is violence, is a waste of resources. The waste of resources, the excessive consumption of natural resources is all violence to me, because the resources are not being spent for the good of the humankind, and we are not conscious about posterity. We are not here to consume all the resources of the world and
Hassan
leave
bhai.
nothing for posterity.
Hassan bhai.
Yeah.
I would like now Dr. Eraj Bharucha to respond, because I would like all panelists to speak a little bit. Eraj, can you put in your opinion, sir?
Yeah, just a few things. I think what Hassan Bhai has very beautifully brought out is the history of violence and the various shades of gray that violence takes. I do see what Robert was asking about and saying how strong is that link with climate change. I think it can be brought out, in fact, in a lot of ways. Look at today what is happening with climate change refugees. The fact that you have refugees come from similar types of phenomena as violence does, and it is a type of violence. So one can make up these things. Agriculture, food security, and so on also can be therefore looked at as a wider perspective of violence. But I would have liked to see more of the solutions. Like, we understand that climate change, the solution will remain always removal of fossil fuel, changes in industry, changes in transport, bringing about a certain level of sustainability. And I mean, every COP has brought that out very strongly. The problem has been about the cost of management of adaptation and climate change. And of course, very much more importantly, mitigation. Because if we look at climate change responses, about and this is an American statistic, I don't think it applies to India, in fact, that if you look at climate change adequate responses, then 70%, they say, comes out of good governance, and about 30% comes from people. I don't think this way, I don't think there's any statistics in India to sort of validate that kind of thing. So there are a lot of linkages. I think understanding sustainability from a violence perspective has not been explored sufficiently. So it's probably an interesting problem. So I would have liked to see Hassan Bhai telling us we have possible solutions to climate change. Do we have possible solutions to violence?
See, my humble submission is, we have solutions, but those solutions can never be implemented with the same balance of forces. That is my humble submission. That is why I go to the root, and I go to the education system. I go to the knowledge generation. We can't eliminate violence. We can't have sustainable solutions without changing the system. The scientists have been suggesting solutions for last 30 years. 1992 was the first time when the 1700 scientists gave a collective warning and they offered solutions, and they've been renewing it. But has it made any impact or effect on the powers that be? A big no. So it is not the absence of solution. It is the absence of the right balance of forces. Without having the forces, ultimately the society moves as a vector product of forces. Unless that vector product is in our favor, we cannot implement, we cannot have the desired policies on ground. That is my understanding.
Okay, Hassan Bhai, I would like now Sanjay Saxena and after that Sandeep Bide and after that Gaurav Nalkur to speak few words. Sanjay ji, you're next.
Yeah, good evening. Hassan Bhai, thank you. That was a very interesting presentation and truly original, I think. And I think there's no doubt that violence does contribute to global warming, climate change. But two or three things where I have a slightly different perspective. One is that uh, warfare and conflict is probably integral to human society, and it has been there since before capitalism or communism or United States or any of this happened. Like we have descriptions of the Mahabharata, of course, that's a fictional account, but Ashoka fighting in Kaling or Alexander starting off conquering the world, numerous instances. So violence is something which is probably, at least military violence, is not directly linked to capitalism. At least it wasn't for much of human history. That's point number one. Point number two is that even if you look at military violence, it's probably declined over the years. If you look at Europe, or if for that matter, even India, you find that the number of wars, active fighting, has reduced substantially over the years. If you see India in the 1700s or 1600s, there were n number of wars going on. And in Europe, they still talk of the 100 Years' War and 7 Years' War and all little principalities forever fighting against each other. That is number two. Number three, what I would feel is that, of course, military-industrial complex was a major factor. But my submission to you is that now that capitalism has evolved, so those paradigms of the 60s are perhaps not that relevant. For instance, now if you look at the US economy, the military-industrial complex accounts for only about 3.5% of GDP. And the biggest American companies are now companies like Apple and Facebook and Google and Microsoft and what have you. So capitalism too has evolved, I feel. Another point that I would like to make is that we can't blame others for our inability to get along with each other. I mean, if India and Pakistan can't sort out their problems and we end up buying arms from Russia and Pakistan buys arms from US, so we are equally to blame. If the Burmese are killing the Rohingyas, or if Tamils and Sinhalese are fighting, I really don't know to what extent we can blame the US or Russia or anybody else for it. I mean, I should be man enough to take responsibility for my own actions instead of blaming them elsewhere. But having said this, I take your point that there is clearly a direct and significant link between level of violence in the modern world and the climate change danger that it poses. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay ji. And I will now request Sandhi to.
Shall I respond for a minute, Farooq Bhai?
You can, of course.
Sir, you are seeing in terms of nations only and saying we are responsible. I said it very clearly that all the powers that be, virtually all, if exceptions, if any apart, are hand in glove.
Okay, so you feel that.
Sir, please don't equate so-called nation with the people. The powers that be and the people are different. The powers that be don't die on the battlefield. It is the common people who die.
Point taken, Hassan. And Sandhi, would you like to go ahead? Because I would like to get Gaurav also in the. Sandhi, go ahead.
I thank you very much for giving me time. I think I wrote a number of points. I'm going to limit myself because of lack of time.
That's why I kept you second class, so that you can speak in detail, you know.
Yeah. So the very first thing, I think the elephant in the room we have not even spoken about is population. I think when resources are smaller than the demands, then the issue about fighting comes and the violence comes. So we kept on saying, hey, what's the solution? What's the solution? For me, at least, it's extremely simple. You have a husband, wife, two people. You say, two people are going to be gone. They're going to die. They produce two children. A simple math will tell you that this population can be stabilized by having only 1 or 2 children, right? That in itself fundamentally solves a lot of the problems, because at least not increasing the consumption, but stabilizing it, where the population doesn't grow by leaps and bounds. The second thing is, nothing in this world that I know of any human has gotten by peacefully asking. You peacefully ask, you never get. So you have to fight it out, even when you are right. Nobody gives it to you on a silver platter saying, hey, if this belongs to you, you ought to have it. So the only way I meaning the human being ends up, is then eventually using force to get what is rightfully yours. Third point, look at if...
So can we discuss
Big-
one by one?
Sure,
Can we
sure, sure.
discuss one by one? You said
Please.
about population. I agree. It is there in my thesis. And here, if you may recall, I mentioned about the land use that US took in 2005 into account, and the Amazon thing becoming source, bulk of it. That was because of population is one of the major factors. And second thing is, where does the population come? Now, it's a chicken and egg story. What came first? How do you control population? Why population in the West is the rate of growth is much less than in the so-called developing countries? Why? So I am not at all saying that population is not one of the factors. It is there. It is well established, and all those scientists who issued warnings, it is there. It is one of the factors they have listed, and I entirely agree with that. One. Second point was, because I forget by the time you sum up. Second point you raised was?
Having peacefully asked what is truly
Okay.
yours.
Now, violence, who uses that violence? It is the powers that be of all the nations that use, as on date, that use the violence to usurp further resources and greater concentration of resources. If there is a violence of the have-nots, then it's okay. But that is not the violence that takes place. The violence that takes, again, that's why I said the vector product of forces. So, okay, now you go to the third one.
No, I understand, Hassan Bhai. I think you mentioned, clearly gave an example why India-China war could have been avoided. If it was, once you take, your country is being taken, you say, hey, this is my country, don't overtake it. There is no way of simple solutions. The only way you get out is fighting. Otherwise, nobody peacefully gives you what you rightfully deserve.
Sir, one thing I quoted, not me, it is India Defense Review, in which a colonel is writing and he is blaming, not me.
I know, but there are 50
It is
other
not
people
me.
who are saying it's a right,
It was
a right war.
And there is not one factor. There are n number of factors. The report that the government set up a committee, and the report was never made public. On that war. So,
What's the alternate choice? Not have war?
Pardon?
What is the alternate choice, which is not to have war, and we all be speaking Mandarin?
See, who went in? Again, you are picking up from the middle. You are not going to the root. You are not going to the, one second, you are not going to the metabolic rate. You are not going to the concepts. You're not going to the education system. Unless we understand right from the ABC, if we pick up from somewhere in the middle, we will always go different places, in different directions, depending on what ideology we have. That is why I will request you, humbly request you, with folded hands, to go to the root. There, if you find a problem, please let me know.
Okay.
I gave you the root, which is population. I think we have a tendency. Let me.
Okay,
Can I
you
moderate
tell me,
here?
what is
Can I
the
moderate
problem
here?
with the education?
Can I moderate here, Hassan Bhai?
Is Carl Sagan wrong? Is Carl Sagan wrong?
Hassan Bhai,
Boliye.
see, I would request that this subject of global warming, which is so interesting and everybody has a viewpoint, I think today we should take Hassan Abdullah's opinion as the beginning of the discussion. And then maybe probably I will ask next time, probably Sandhi to make a philosophy on how he feels that population growth is responsible for global warming.
Sure.
And when we look at the subject from that viewpoint, I would now, Sandeep, you have any fourth or fifth point, then you finish that.
No, I think there are a few other points, but again, I want to give a time. Maybe I'll add one. I think in all of those, I think we talked about secrecy and openness. I think we can't take a purist view, otherwise we'll all be socialists. I mean, I cannot expect my doors of my home will be all open all the time. I have to close my doors, because I know no matter what, I might be a purist, but the rest of the world is not. So the only way I protect my assets, intellectual or physical, is to close the door. And that's what secrecy is all about. If I'm too open, people take advantage of me. So it results into me closing the doors.
So with due respect, you may be knowing better than me that when the pandemic broke out and the vaccines were prepared, there was a huge demand that other companies, because the companies that made vaccines originally had made more than due profits. So there was a huge demand that there are countries who can't afford, there are people who can't afford. So other companies should be allowed to manufacture, but that was not accepted.
Okay, Hassan bhai,
हाँ, बोलिए.
we will not go into discussion there, because basically our opinion is that how to help the world powers, or as individuals or as people, to see that global warming is taken care of. Now, how it happens, where it happens, I know, Robert, you would like to point it, but Robert, quickly, and then I want Gaurav to speak. And there are two people in the attendees, Tariq Bhai and one more who want to speak. So Ronald, please quickly, and Robert quickly, and then I'll talk to Gaurav. Robert, please.
Maybe I'll speak at the end, because it'll take about maybe 3 minutes.
Yeah. So
Because I've got some very strong opinions.
Robert, I will give you the thing. And Gaurav, I would like a young person's opinion now here, Gaurav.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you for including me here, first of all. So a very interesting presentation. It was nice to see, the connections being drawn between so many various events. So just a few points. One was, I think, like Sanjay sir earlier mentioned, violence has always been a part of human history, whether we like it or not. It is true that perhaps recently it has been used for capitalist gain, but you cannot link the root of violence. I don't think I can link the root of violence to capitalism. I'm not saying that the presentation did. This is just my view. And a second thing was, it was interesting to note that it's not only government policies, but also our way of thinking as a root cause. Maybe this has been indoctrinated into us. Maybe it is natural over generations and generations of seeing conflicts. But I'd like to think that this is a possible solution. That it won't be a quick fix, but perhaps the solution lies with changing the common man's opinion first, and then slowly working our way up to governments and deep state.
And Gaurav, you have been working with nature. You are a bird specialist in birds and photography and things like that. You can see over a period of time that people have started taking care of wildlife. People have started going to nature, and a lot of work has slowly started. Like some years back, the ozone layer was a problem, and then we had these gases which we were using in our refrigeration system. We stopped using them. Maybe that was a quick fix that time. Global warming is a really big issue, but reduction in use of plastics, reducing wastage of, as Hassan Bhai said, how to reduce entropy. So Sandhi has an argument that reduce the population automatically. Then somebody will stand up and say, "अरे violence तो अच्छा है, उससे वैसे ही population कम हो जाता है, वैसे ही एक दूसरे को मारते रहते हैं." Russia and Ukraine, we do not have population problem, but they have ego problem. Anyway, I will request now Tariq Bhai to say he's in the attendees. So Tariq Bhai, are you there? Can you speak? Tariq Bhai and Nakul Dev both have raised their hands. Tariq Bhai, I have permitted you to talk.
He's on mute.
Yeah, I was listening through it. I am going through all this news day by day, and it looks like sometimes really disheartening. And it feels like where are we leading to? Like at a very grassroots level, when we talk to, because I also am into construction industry and airport operations. So we say that boss pani nahi hoga kal ko. So the third world war is going to be on water. That's what we are worried about, because
Yes.
in the Delhi airport, the water table has gone down 500 meters.
Okay.
So there is no water there. And so I'm not talking of big things. Let's start from the very, very, very small things. As Hassan Bhai said, the root. And the root is like sustainability. Sustainability of solutions that we talk about, there are big things. But then sustainability of human being, how to survive, that is going to be a big question mark, in the immediate future. So that's my thought after listening this wonderful talk from Hassan Bhai, and it was really enlightening the way he has taken the entire the cunning US politics all over those years. So he summed it up very nicely. But for me, it is like I feel when just now I was seeing a small child. That was coming to my mind.
Our generation has destroyed quite a bit of the environment.
Yes.
Our coming
Yes.
generations are going to suffer. That's a fact.
That's what.
And I will now request Nakul ji to speak. I've requested you to unmute yourself and speak, and then we'll have Robert D'Souza. Nakul, are you there? Okay. Robert, you can take over because I think Nakul is not available.
Okay, thanks. No, I was just, I'm going to come back to what Tariq said just now, which was, I think, very important. For me, I've been an environmentalist all my life. Actually, I not only have been part of WWF and BNHS and all these things, but I do what I need to do in my house itself. And that's what I feel. It starts with everyone.
Yes, that's
like
right.
You put solar panels on your house, you have attic insulation, you have energy saving windows, and all those things I've actually done.
Save the
But but my problem is the extreme viewpoints are the main cause of the controversy on climate change. And being an environmentalist, I can understand the environmentalist talking, but one has to see this other side also. People who are for industrial progress at any cost do not see the environmental side.
Yes.
And neither do the conservationists. They do not look at sustainable practices for growth, since growth has to be there, has to exist. For example, hydroelectric power is considered totally green, but it's not totally green because there's methane gas which collects in stagnant water. So it is 99% green, but it's not totally green. And that is very important because you have to have a balance. Climate change is debatable because the fact is that climate change is partly natural and partly man-made. Now you can debate the extent to which it is, but that is besides the point. The controversy we have is because we are debating the wrong topic. We should be debating about man-made pollution. Man-made pollution is not debatable. One has only to experience the atmosphere in New Delhi, Los Angeles, or other cities which have industrial complexes to confirm this. There's no debate about man-made pollution. But the important thing is the solutions for man-made pollution to remove that is the same as for climate change, which is proposed for climate change. And man-made pollution not only covers the air, but it covers land and water too. Like Tariq said, fresh water is going to be a problem because we have the same amount of water as we had when the dinosaurs were there. It's only that more of it is polluted. And it's unfortunate that the global warming debate has detracted and distracted from other beneficial activities like planting more trees, activities to reduce gasoline consumption, shoreline erosion, carbon capture, all those things. And of course, renewable energy. If Europe had not foolishly depended on Russian oil in Ukraine, the war would be over. It would not have even started, maybe. The important thing is that even assuming that major contributor to climate change is natural, for people who think that is, why should we care? Why should one want to accelerate the detrimental effect by burning fossil fuels? It's common knowledge that the fossil fuel lobby gets lucrative profits and subsidies to perpetuate what they want to do to attack renewable energy. So they talk about natural gas being clean. It's cleaner than coal, but it's definitely nowhere near renewable energy. So we have to look at pollution as the main contributor, not really climate change, because then there's no debate. That's my point.
And I would like to add here, Robert, that, when you said about renewable energy, there's a discussion now on how electric energy, which is depending largely on batteries, which work with, which is that battery mein kya vaparte chemical here?
Lithium.
Lithium, which is again another place where there would be wars for lithium, because lithium resources also are less. So
Exactly. Unless graphene batteries come in, which will be huge.
Yeah. So Sandeep, closing remarks, and then we can close, and then we can say the vote of thanks. Sandeep, you finish, and then we will. So Dr. Eraj, after Sandeep finishes, I would like you to say the vote of thanks to Hassan Bhai. So Sandeep.
Before that, I would like to say
Acha.
words.
Tell me, Hassan Bhai.
No, let everybody say, then I would like to say.
क्या होगा ये ग्लोबल वार्मिंग पे आपने जो अभी जो डिबेट शुरू किया, अभी हम उसके ऊपर नंबर ऑफ प्रोग्राम्स डालेंगे. तो रॉबर्ट डिसूजा को बोलेंगे कि भाई तुम्हारा एक ओपिनियन दो ग्लोबल वार्मिंग का. देन वील हैव संदीप इन फ्यूचर प्रोग्राम्स, वी विल हैव on global warming your individual perspectives, which will be very interesting to take as a series, Chalo Hassan bhai, okay, Sandeep finish, then Sandeep, we will ask Hassan bhai, and then Eraj Bharucha will give the vote of thanks. Okay, Sandeep.
Yeah, I just want to add one. I have added two remarks in the chat to kind of reflect my perspective. But I think at the end of the day, as Robert very eloquently said, going to either extremes is not going to be helpful. You cannot blame capitalism, because capitalism, like it or not, is an innovation, is a growth engine. But on the other hand, you can't be stagnant and take a socialist view saying everything is spread equally to everyone. And of course, then in that process, some people will work and some people will want to work, and people who work will always say, hey, other people are not working. Why should I share my wealth, my money, my resources to other people? So somewhere there is a middle point. I would like to. Yeah, in spite of all the discussions, I truly and honestly, and I'll bring it when I get a chance to speak, is population is the root at the bottom of everything.
So we'll take that as another subject in November, Sandeep.
Yeah. So I would like to close with that.
Yeah, Hassan bhai, you.
Yeah. Sir, please recall what Einstein said. I gave two quotes. One was, brood over the problem for 55 minutes. Please do that. Please do that, because if you do that, then the solution will be evident. And the second quote, Einstein said, the solution lies outside the domain of the problem. The thinking that has led you to the trap, that has led to the problem, will not solve the problem. There has to be a rupture in the thought process to get the solution to the problem, to the mess that we have created. These two things, please recall what Einstein said.
I think that
I'll just submit that.
Yeah, point is well taken. So, Dr. Eraj, I think if you can, unless Apurva, you need to add something, or should I ask?
No, please, we can close.
Yeah. Eraj bhai, jara, Dr. Sab. Dr. Eraj? No.
Yeah. Well, I must say that was an interesting session. It needs a lot more thinking because you can look at this sort of thing from so many different perspectives, especially in terms of climate change. And a couple of things that were mentioned was the need for the right type of education. So you start at school level telling school children what climate change is about and what they can do about it. And the fact that there are many specific issues on climate change that we need to address, and Mr. Merchant has very well brought that out. And looking at root causes, there's again, I feel, not one root cause, but multiple root causes that you can deal with. It's like a tree with many, many roots. So thank you very much, Hassan Bhai, for putting in some new thoughts into this whole thing about violence. And to me, violence is so abhorrent that we need to look at violence as it's in itself, in its ethics, and its values. And perhaps that is what we don't do sufficiently in terms of violence. And you were perfect in saying that when we first think of it, we think of a war, and there's so many other types of violence that affect the world today. Thank you very much for your session. There's been a lot of thinking that has gone into it. Thanks very much.
And I would like to thank all the panelists to be present. And, this is an important discussion, and I will be glad to take Gyan into a series of such discussion. Maybe one day Sandhi can do something, one day Robert is there on 22nd, but he's on a separate agenda, but indirectly related to global warming, how you preserve nature and things like that. And Sanjay ji, thank you very much. Apurva, thank you for the solid support for this program. Doing it alone is quite challenging. And with this, and Sandhi and Iraj and Robert and all the people who are on the attendee list, thank you very much for joining on this important thing. And the recording of this will be there on YouTube by Monday. And the Facebook link I'll be putting on the Gyanpedia and other things, so people can hear this program peacefully. As Hassan Bhai said, 55 minutes program के बारे में सोचो, फिर जाके 5 मिनट आपको solution मिलेगा. I mean, it's a metaphor saying that पहला problem के बारे में सोचो, तो जाके कुछ solution मिलेगा. And आज हसन भाई ने हमको एक सोचने के लिए शुरुआत कर दी है. Let's take it forward. Okay, Hassan bhai, thank you very much and good night.
Good night, sir.
Thanks to all.
Bye.
Thanks,
you.
Manoj. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Hassan bhai. Thank you.